Contrary to common belief, the choice between a wet and dry lubricant is not solely dependent on weather conditions. With an abundance of lubricant options available, the decision-making process may seem overwhelming. However, lubricants generally fall into two categories: wet and dry. In this video, we'll delve deep into the details of how to make the right choice for you. I'm going to break this video down into 4 parts. What is wet and dry lubricants? The advantages and disadvantages of both, where I recommending using which lubricant, and what brand I recommend at the end. Right before we delve in, linked below I have some video guides on cleaning, drip waxing your chain and immersive waxing your chain as well. So if you need to go deeper, they're there. So what you clicked on this video for? Types of lubricants. As I said, there are generally 2 types of lubricants, wet and dry. Let's start with the wet. Wet lubricants use an oil base for the lubricant, and of course will stay as an oil after you have applied it to the chain. It is as simple as that for wet lubricants. Dry lubricants, on the other hand, will dry out after you have applied it to your chain, leaving a hard and slippery layer between the components of your chain. Dry lubricants tend to be wax-based, and any that aren't a wax, I wouldn't personally recommend them. With the wax-based lubricants such as these, the wax is suspended within a water base, and that way it can make its way deep into the chain, as the only place you need the lubricant is in between the rollers on the inside of the chain. There is a final option, which is immersive waxing, which I will get onto later in the video. Right, let's run over the positives and negatives of using a wet lubricant. Let's start with the advantages. First of all, it's very easy to apply. Secondly, it's ready to roll as soon as you put it onto your chain. There's no drying off period. It does last longer in the rain and in wet conditions. It also protects the chain from rust after riding in those wet conditions. It can also handle salty roads when you're here in winter a lot better than a dry lubricant. It also can have less frequent maintenance intervals, and you can also leave the chain on the bike when you want to clean and maintain the chain. Let's go into the disadvantages. As an oil, it will pick up any single little piece of dirt, dust and grime and bring it into the chain rollers, and this creates a grinding paste within the chain, wearing it out faster. Dirty chains also give you chain tattoos, which ruin your white socks, and if your chain drops off, well, you're probably going to have to touch it to put it back on, so you're going to get very dirty hands as well. It also takes a lot more time and effort to clean the chain properly, which I have linked to the video below. It can be a lot quicker if you're not cleaning the chain fully though. Also, if you are cleaning the chain properly, you're going to go through a lot of degreaser to fully clean your chain. Most people don't, which is usually why your chain looks black again within about 10 minutes of cycling. You probably haven't removed all of the old lubricant from the chain. The lubricants can also still be washed out by water, but this depends on the brand that you're using. Because you now have that grinding paste of dirt within the chain, the lifespan of the chain won't last as long as if you're using a wax or a dry lubricant. Not only this, all of your components get dirty alongside the chain, giving you even more cleaning to do. And cleaning things like the cassette as well as the chain is a pain. Finally, it's almost impossible to keep the outside of your chain dry. Fun fact, you only need lubricant inside the chain. Anything outside the chain is just attracting more dirt. So there's most of them for the wet lubricant. Let's get on to dry or waxed lubricants. The first advantage is it doesn't pick up much dirt. Because it's dry, it practically just bounces back off the chain. And it also means no more chain tattoos and no more dirty hands if your chain drops off, or if you need to move your chain when you get a puncture. Waxed or dry lubricants are far superior in dry conditions, and it becomes even more effective in off-road dry conditions. The lifespan of your chain will last many, many more miles if you're cleaning it properly. It is easier and faster to clean your chain properly, as when you're cleaning it, less dirt is taken inside the chain where it wears out your chain. You can also just melt the wax out when it needs cleaning fully. The wax also still lasts well in the rain, as wax is very water resistant and hydrophobic, and it can easily handle a few splashes from some wet patches in the road. So don't worry about it on those damp days, it's just heavy rain. It is a more efficient lubricant. You'll have a much faster chain. That means when you're putting more power in, more power is making it through the chain into the rear wheel of the bike, meaning you're faster. Finally, there are no cleaning chemicals needed to clean your chain, as you would with a wet lubricant. Let's go into some of the disadvantages though. The lubricant itself generally doesn't last as long as a wet lubricant in the rain. There are also more frequent service intervals, and you occasionally need to take the chain off for maintenance, but this is a very easy task to learn. After a wet ride, if you don't dry your chain off with a microfiber cloth, then it's quite prone to rust, as it's missing that protective coating you get from oil, decreasing the life of the chain. One place where it really suffers is wet and muddy off-road conditions. So you may want to run multiple chains depending on which season that you are in. Another disadvantage is that you need to strip the chain of all of its factory grease before the wax will bond to the inside of the chain. Luckily, you only have to do this once, and that's when you first buy the chain. And for me, if you compare this to a wet lubricant, this is the only time you're using any solvents to clean the chain. Another disadvantage for wax lubricants is that after you apply it, there is a waiting period for the wax or the lubricant to dry on your chain. This period can be as little as 10 minutes, but it can be up to an overnight period for most of these wax lubricants, so you've got to apply them the day before. If you don't, and you ride the chain without it fully dry, it will just push out all of that wax that you've just put in there. Let's move on to the next part of the video where I'm going to say where I use which lubricant. These are just my recommendations on where to use them, but of course you can take a look at the advantages and disadvantages and make your own decisions on this. Wet lubricants are usually used for my commuter and winter bikes. On my commuter, the components are cheap to replace and I don't want to spend much time maintaining it. I just want to slap some more lube on when the chain starts to get a little bit louder and I'm good to go. With my winter bike as well, here in the UK we have wet and salty roads throughout the whole of winter, and it means I would be cleaning my chain after every single ride if I use a dry lube. And because the service intervals for a wet lubricant are pretty good, they're usually around 300 to 500 kilometers, it just means there's less work to do when in winter. Dry lubricants I reserve for my more expensive and faster bikes, like my road bike and my time trial bike. The more expensive components on these bikes, for me, warrant the more frequent service intervals, every 300 kilometers or so. As I said, there's much less wear on the chain, and this means your cassette and chainring will last a lot longer too, saving you even more money. The wax chains also provide a much lower friction chain, making them faster for racing. When it comes to relubricating my wax chain, if I'm using the drip method, I will reapply the drip every 300 kilometers, and after the third application, I will give the chain a hot water bath. I have a full guide on this linked below, so if you want to go deeper, you can get into it. I did say in the introduction I was going to recommend some brands for you to use, and when it comes to choosing the best lubricants, there is only one website to go to, and that is Zero Friction Cycling. They're the only place that have done extensive testing in all conditions to see how long a lubricant can last. The top 3 best and tested wet lubricants are the Silka Synergetic, which is my personal recommendation, Rex Black Diamond, and Revo Lubes. All of these lubricants are on the more expensive end, but your drive chain will thank you, and you'll also have to use less lubricant as well when using these lubes. When it comes to using a dry lubricant, Effetto Flower Power Max is quite cheap and tests excellently. Then my two recommendations are Ceramic Speed UFO and Silka Super Secret Drip. These two are amazing for your chain. Finally, True Tungsten All Weather is also a wax-based lubricant and is pretty damn cheap and tests incredibly as well. Then finally, I mentioned there are also hot melt waxes, where I will link a video below. Any hot melt wax you choose is going to be the superior option, as they all test excellently in all conditions. So there we go, your entry guide into wet and dry lubricants. Well then, if you've made it this far, as there's always so much information on this topic, if you want any guides on how to use any of these, then there is a link for each video below. If there is something that I've missed here and you need to ask, please put it in the comments and I will do my absolute best to answer it. Also, you can ask me privately on Instagram over here, because there's just so much information on lubricants. Well everyone, I've been Jason, this is Cycling Unboxed. I'll see you in the next video.